I'm Devin Bateson. It's June 11th, 2015. We're here, 2015. We're here at the Dundas Museum in the doctor's office, 139 Park Street West. I'm here with Keith Green. Can you please state your full name, Keith?
Keith Thomas Green. How about that?
Beautiful.
That's my full name.
What year were you born?
1954.
And where?
Hamilton. At the Henderson Hospital, which is now the Jarabinsky Center.
How long have you lived in Dundas?
Moved here when I was 11 years old. So that would be 1963, I think.
Why did you move here?
My mom and dad came back from England after my dad was very ill and wanted to live in a small town. Dad worked at Dominion Glass, which was the north end of Hamilton. And they weren't crazy about, getting a house down there and bringing me up in that sort of environment down there. It was different environment, And so, it's my mom really that pushed it, because we were living up on Richwell at the time, which was Upper James and Richwell, in an apartment, and she always wanted a house. So we found a place down here, and I lived right down the street at 91 Park Street West. So up until then, we'd moved quite a bit, and so.
So what's your earliest childhood memory?
I can't remember the street now. It was off of, it was off Main Street in Hamilton, by Wellington, in that area. I had a little car that I pushed around the neighborhood, and there was a nice little Italian lady at the other end, and she always gave me an ice cream every day. And my dad, I think when I was about 2.5 or 3 years old, he always wanted a train set. So he made a train set for me. But what do you do when you're 3? You just stand there and watch it go around. Couldn't touch it because you'd, mess it up. So yeah, those are some of those memories that were good. Yeah. That's the earliest ones that I can sort of recall.
Who took care of you growing up?
Well, mom and dad both worked. So back then, I was basically a latchkey kid. So, it's different than now. So probably when I was 6 or 7 years old, there was people on the street that would look in on you, or you'd go see them. I remember in Richwell, there was a Dutch lady whose son happened to be on the Dundas Fire Department. His name was Van de Veer. And she lived in an apartment 2 doors down from ours, and I'd come home from school, basically tell her I was there, and she says, okay, you want anything like milk and cookies? I said, no, I'm going to play with my friend Edgar. And Edgar and I would go out. His dad owned Complete Rentals and up on the mountain, so we'd go out on the truck. And it was a riot, because he'd pay us, I think 25 cents or 50 cents or something to sit on the truck and help him unload stuff, like chairs and equipment and things. And, we're 5, 6 years old, and we'd sit on the side of the truck going down the street. And now you got to be in a 4-point harness in the back seat, for crying out loud. And we're watching the road go by. It was one of those old UPS trucks, where you could sit on the seat, and there's no seat in the front, so we'd sit on the floor, right? So, and mom and dad would come home, and I'd sort of try to cook supper and stuff, but they both worked. So mom worked at Gibson Welding, and dad, like I said, was at Dominion Glass. So it was an interesting life. And then the same thing happened here when we moved here. So there was a lady next door, Mrs. Young, and I would come home for lunch and have lunch at her place. But, probably around 12 or 13, you took care of yourself, right? And I used to remember the kids back in grade 7 and 8 come over to the house because there was nobody there, and we'd have grilled cheese sandwiches every lunch hour. So there'd be 8 or 10 of us in the house, and we were good kids. We never messed anything up. So.
I remember doing that. Do you have a story about your parents that you can think of that you just remember, something? I guess it's a word I'm looking for, but just a memory about them that just kind of sticks with you.
Oh, I've got lots of memories. I mean, my dad, when he was working at Dominion Glass. It's a very dirty. Glass making is very loud and dirty. It's hot and it's a filthy place. And I remember him taking me down there when I think I was 3 or 4 years old. Of course, he wanted to show off his little boy, and I couldn't get past the front gate. I mean, this thing was just overwhelming. It was a huge plant. It was like walking into a steel company. And I got up some courage, I think, about a year later and walked around it. But interesting memories about that. And my mom, I went to nursery school when I was 3 or 4 years old. And I know I'm going back and forth here a bit, and that was down on, let me see, John Street and where the Hydro building is right now in the Central Fire Station. There was an old church there, and Miss Hyde and Miss Wood, who lived in Dundas, had a nursery school. And fondly remember the cheese whiz sandwiches every day and lukewarm milk sitting on the radiator. I think Bill Cosby got a joke about that one with the graham crackers and milk. But every day she'd walk me up to that place I was talking about on Wellington Street, and that house. I'd go past the fire department every day, and I'd want to sit in the trucks and put the helmet on and sort of play firefighter. And the guys were phenomenal. They were great. So that's some of my first memories of, you know, doing that. And you know, Mom and Dad were great, and I had a great life once we reached Dundas. But Dad wasn't a well man, and he had a diverticulum of the bladder, which he was operated on. But the general, you know, hospitals aren't exactly the cleanest places in the world back then in the 60s, late 50s. Got an infection, and they couldn't really help him, so he decided to move back to England. And so we packed everything up. We were living on East 6th Street at the time, and sold the house, packed everything up, and went to England. And I spent a year there, going to 3 different schools. It wasn't a pleasant experience for me, because kids are pretty cruel. And even though you're part of so-called Britain and that, you're not, because it was one of the worst winters in history, and they had snow, and all the kids wore short pants, and you know, I'm not wearing short pants anytime soon in the snow. And you know, I get bits and pieces of memory that getting beaten up on the school ground and everything else. And I finally said, I'm not going anymore. I'm done. I've had it. So, you know, and like I said, I went to 3 different schools there. So, and they got rid of the infection. But Britain wasn't the same. It's probably about 10 years after he came here, because Mom and Dad immigrated in 1951. So they ended up moving back, and he got his old job back. So that's when we ended up on Franklin Road for a little bit at an apartment, a friend of his, and then moved over to Richwell fairly quickly. But I was tossed around to different schools and stuff, and the school system over there is different than here. So a lot of the times they were challenged when I got back here as to what grade to put me into. So I ended up starting school when I was 6, and you know, between grade 2 and 3, I was put back, and then I put forward, and then it was just a mess. So you know, I ended up at Buchanan Park up on the mountain when we had the apartment there, and of course, you know, moved here after that. So I think it was grade 2 and 3 and in the other school, but it's hard to get the years right. You got to sort of mark it all down. But we had a good time, and we were by ourselves up there. I mean, you know, the parents worked. Like I said, the Dutch lady gave us lunch and stuff, but a lot of times we made our own sandwiches and rode our bikes. And we'd go all the way from Upper James right out to Shadoke, and the sanatorium was an interesting place for kids, because a lot of the people were walking around, and you know, they're not quite right. So when you're 5 and 6 years old, what do you know, right? Not politically correct today, but you used to watch them bang into stuff and walk around and fall over and all the stuff that they were doing. We didn't know any different. And we used to hike in the woods out there and where the Shadoke golf course is. So it was quite a ways away. We had a lot, lots of fun, and then we'd come down the Queen Street Hill on our bikes, and go right downtown to the waterfront and go right back up again, and it's crazy. These days, I think you've got a limit of about 1,500 feet. I think back then we were 15 kilometers. We used to walk about 10 blocks to go to Inch Park swimming. So it was, it was interesting, really interesting. And Dad had a part-time job with Bachelor Studios, so that's where I learned all my photography skills, because I was carrying the cameras around with him, and he taught me that. So way back then, when they had nothing but black and white film, and he used Minoltas, and he used to carry the stuff for him at weddings and things. He did it part-time. So wasn't terribly pleased with his job, but when you are displaced by the war, which the two of them were, you end up getting what you can, and he didn't have the education that he wished he'd had. My mother, on the other hand, won a scholarship to an art school but couldn't afford to go, so she ended up doing bookkeeping all of her life. But really interesting story about her that I learned in 2009 during the war. She worked in Churchill's bunkers, and that came out. You were supposed to keep everything a secret, but I've got that on a YouTube video, and that's Mum's WW2 job is on YouTube. I interviewed her before she passed away. And she knew where every ship and submarine was every day. And so it was all top secret, and it was MI5. And she wouldn't tell anybody. So my dad doesn't know. Nobody knows. But when it came out, I got some news articles done and everything. I was trying to get her a veteran's pension. But when you're in the Secret Service, you don't exist. So there is no pension. There is no veteran's number. So it was very interesting when it came out. And she just came by that job by chance, because they gave her a job working on the buses, and she didn't like it. So she quit. And you can't do that in the war. You got to do as you're told. And so they gave her that because of her skill set with bookkeeping and everything, because she worked at the Army Navy stores as a bookkeeper. So it was really interesting stuff, and quite heartwarming to hear that and what she did during the war. And of course, Dad was overseas for 6 years, and British gentlemen just volunteered, and he never got hurt or injured. But they didn't. Their entire life was completely turned upside down. He was Catholic at the time, and became an atheist basically when he got out, because he saw what the Vatican, which was their holy grail, was totally protected by Mussolini, and a deal with Hitler not to bomb it. And that didn't go off well with him at all. So, when he came back, he was just absolutely livid with the way the whole thing worked and how the Italians made the deal and everything. So, came over here and never went to church again. So.
Did that kind of, like living in the town, did that like change how you grew up? Just if you weren't your family wasn't very religious then, right? So No, it did. I mean, back in those days, you sort of gravitated towards some kind of belief system. You don't have what you've got now, which is very secular in cases, and because of that, obviously, when I was born, what are we going to christen? How are we going to christen him? And Dad goes, I'm not necessarily interested in him being either. So Mum was Church of England. And they tried the church thing for a little while, but it never really worked. I think if you're going to do that, you've got to start at a very, very early age. And they didn't. And I don't necessarily have that belief system now. And depending on your questions and where we get to, I had some fascinating stuff happen to me when I was 15, which changed my belief systems, which was kind of interesting. So, but moving to Dundas, no, we just didn't gravitate towards any of that, because the war really genuinely psychologically damaged a lot of that generation. They were completely displaced. In fact, I can't believe that we've got the society we have based on what happened, and there were 16, 17-year-olds being placed in the middle of a battle zone and asked to kill somebody. It was just, you're told,
actually not asked, but told. And it was crazy stuff. And yet you see the teenagers today, and they haven't got a clue, and nor should they. They shouldn't be put in a position like that at all. And that was really unfortunate. But you know what? They came out of it. They were pretty level-headed, right? As much as they were traumatized, they got over it. Stiff upper lip stuff, you know, that the British did. So anyway, it's interesting.
Well, I guess you kind of took. So what area of Dundas did you grow up in again? Sorry.
Right here.
Right in this
Right
little block.
in this whole. Well, it's more than a block. I mean, I had friends up in Tally Ho, okay, which is what would that be? The south end of Dundas. So we had a couple of wealthy friends, and they had very, very nice homes. The parents were, the one, Stu Selden's dad owned Vernon Directories and Printing, and we'd go up there and swim in his pool, and that was one of the gigs we did in the evenings. When it got dark, we pool hopped, which was basically, you got your bathing suits on, and you know all the pools in the area, and you usually add them up to about 8 or 10 of them, and what you do is you hop the fence, you dive in, you swim to the end, and you get out and you go to the next one. Right? So no alarms and stuff like that, but that's what we did as kids. And you know, we used to go in the ravines back there, and we'd go for the whole weekend. We'd leave Friday night, just walk down in the ravine, which is all conservation area now, up by Old Ancaster Road and everything. Warren Park is there. And we'd do a campfire and sleep for the 2 days. We weren't more than, I don't know, 1,500 yards or 2,000 yards away from, maybe not even that, from Stu's place, which was on Tally Ho Drive. But you know, lots of friends up there, and had friends down here too. We, when I first got to town, there was friends with David Lawson and Bruce Hill and Rob Hill and all that, and lots of kids in the area. You know, Bill Boot, his dad worked for an accounting company, and he was an accountant for Adam Clark, that's right. And Bill and I became best friends, and so did David, and called him Oscar. And we'd go up on the tracks. So spent most of my life up on the CN tracks, hopping trains. Had a great time. You know.
You just hopped around. Actually got.
Well, we were smart. We figured out how to do it because they had a caboose, and you had to do it when the caboose was out of sight and the engine was out of sight, because they were looking right when they came up. At least we thought they were. So as it turned the bend, it had to go up to Brantford. That's where it was heading, and that's a 1% grade. So it took the train, for the most part, was going extremely slow. You could walk as fast as it was going because they were long and everything. And back then, the cars, not the box cars, but actual automobile cars, were stacked, and they weren't covered like they are now. So we would get up there, hop on one of those, and we'd sit there inside the car. The keys were in it. Never started it or anything. We just sat there and played with everything and looked at the whole stuff, and that was great because we saw all the brand new cars way before they got to market. It was kind of interesting. So we'd come back home, and the parents would wonder, how the hell do those kids know all about the cars? They're not even on the market yet. And there was Cadillacs and Chevs and Chryslers and Fords, pretty much. There was no Japanese cars back then. We're talking about the 60s, right? Early, late 60s, in the middle there, and did a lot of great stuff. We built a lot of forts. That's an interesting story. The Great Escape came out, and kids are always somehow gravitating towards a trend or something that was going on, and The Great Escape was a great movie. So I had this great idea, and I got everybody riled up, and it was about, I don't know, 5 or 6 of us. It was Andy Harvey and Bill Boot and Dave Lawson and Bruce Hill. And what we did was we started building forts. And then there was Phil Baker down the other end of town, and Peter Booker. And we went down, what we did was we went up to the quarry and we started building forts up there, but it was pretty unstable ground because the trains were going by, and they're pretty heavy. And the last thing you want to do is get buried in that stuff. And that's where we spent most of our days, was up in that quarry. you know, and you were trying to stay away from the workers and stuff up there and, you know, do stuff. You know, we used to climb up on the conveyor belt that went across the tracks. And that was a chicken game. So you get on the conveyor and when it came out the end, you got about a good 75-foot drop. And so you're not going to drop into that gravel anytime soon. And that was the chicken game, was jumping off. So you got to jump off before it went out. So that was interesting. And this is a live conveyor belt with stone going on it, you know. And so unfortunately, during the winter, I think it was in February, we were up on the tracks just playing around like we always do. All of a sudden we heard all the sirens and everything going. And we ran down. We were just up by Sydenham Bridge before the new Sydenham Bridge was in, the old one. So we were running up there, and they were digging out this big, huge mound of gravel, just a monster mound of gravel. And as kids, we didn't know how it worked. We had no idea how the gravel and everything worked and what happened. So what would happen is they would have the gravel coming off the crusher, right? And going into this huge pile sitting there. Now, inside the pile, there was a cement culvert where the gravel would be, you'd fill up the trucks. When it was super cold, it would rain or snow on the gravel and it would harden the whole peak. But inside it was hollow. And this one kid decided to do what we were doing. You know, stuff gets around town. And I don't know, maybe we were smarter than the average kids or something, but he went off the conveyor and went straight out. He went into the pile, and of course it broke the top part, and it just completely crushed him and killed him. So that was pretty crazy. And I remember the old fire truck that I've got now, the 56, responded. And I guess the 61 did too, I remember that. But and Mr. Pragiana, who lives 3 houses down from here, he got in the front end loader and was up there for hours digging that whole pile out, trying to find the poor kid. So it was, yeah, that was pretty sad. But these are all little things that you kind of remember the tragedies and stuff. But that's the only person I knew that did that. And I remember going up on the peak in summer days, and we'd take a big can of beans, they came in juice cans, yeah. And we built a campfire up there, and get it going. Just put the beans in the middle of it, and just hang out and talk and stuff, and wait for it to blow up, and see all the beans in the top of the trees. It was great. We were up on the peak all the time, and we used to climb up the face of it, and had a great time. Nobody ever fell. Nobody ever did anything. Went down in a ravine by Two's Falls and Webster's Falls all the time, and you take practically the whole day and walk down there. And back then there was a train station, and it was kind of fun to sit up there and watch the trains come in, and they'd stop. People would get off and they'd carry on. So it was great. But when we hopped the trains, we used to go up to Coketown swimming, and that took you right up there, up the track, and it was a riot. I mean, and the interesting part about that was coming back. So the trains were going at a fair clip, not going up; they're coming down now. So you get on it up there because they were fairly slow, but you really had to run hard to get on them. And then on the way back, we had a whole pile of grass and everything and brush and everything built up by the golf course. And if you missed that, if you didn't jump off there, you were done. You had to go all the way into Hamilton. So where this train slowed down, completely slowed down, was when it turned at the RGB. So that's where it was heading to Toronto. That's where the turning was. And we ended up getting off there. And of course, now we're walking home. So that was that was like Stand By Me. You remember the film? We're walking up the tracks. There's no cell phones. There's no way of getting in contact with the house. We're just walking up the tracks all the way back into Dundas. That was quite a trek, because that's when it started to slow down. So yeah, did that quite a few times. Yeah, lots of fun. Yeah, but we were never sort of destructive with anything. We just pushed the envelope with all kinds of stuff, right? Used to get on top of the crossing things. the lights that, the lights that the trains have to tell them which direction they're going. Well, you could climb up the ladder and get up on top of there and just sit up there, and the engineers weren't happy about that. We'd just be hanging out, up there on these things. And a few times, we had a little bit of a club, not much of one, but the initiation was to go up the Sydenham Railway Bridge. Okay, I got to do that again because it's scary as hell. So we're little kids and we're sitting underneath it, and I guess we're about 12 or 13 years old, and the train had come down the tracks, and these diesels, we didn't have any clue, but they're like 120 tons each, and sometimes it was 3 and 4 of them, and they're coming this way. They're going towards Toronto from Brantford, and they're moving. And the thing was, if you could sit under there while it was going over you, and it couldn't have been any more than this much room, and the rails are going like this as it's going over, and you had to be sitting there when it was doing it. We had a periscope, we were looking, and that was the thing. You could see it coming. But the train's got a fair clearance, right? So we only had to periscope up this much, and that was really scary. And we had a great time. It was and we did it 2 or 3 times, or I don't know how many times. But yeah, it was good. And then the other one was playing chicken with the trains, and I don't think Stand By Me was even a movie back then, but we used to wait for the train to come around the corner, and the guy was coming, and he's got the horn going. He's just laying on the horn, and we had to start at that Sydenham Bridge and run across it. Right? So that was one of the tricks. But it wasn't a long bridge. It wasn't that big. It wasn't that big a deal. It was maybe 30 feet that you were running, but there was no railing or anything. It was just an open bridge. You just ran along that, and then I remember one time the engineer, I don't know, it was hot water that he threw on us. I don't know where they're getting the hot water from in that thing, but because it's a diesel, but just threw a bucket of hot water on us that because we were standing there waving, right? Next thing you know, we're soaked. So learn a lesson on that one. But went for lots of walks and stuff up there, and hiked all over. I mean, you lived our whole lives up there, pretty much, every day. So back to the Great Escape. In order to get some kind of a clubhouse going like that, I had this idea. My dad's garage at Park Street was a wooden floor. So what I decided to do was, why don't we build the fort, and put our stash in there and all that stuff, right, down there. So one day, he's at work every day, so I cut a trap door in the middle, put hinges on it, right. Then he had these mats that he would get from work that you can stand on. They're like those big, thick rubber fatigue mats. And I put that over the door. And then we had to do it like the Great Escape. So I said to my dad, it's really hot. No air conditioning back then. He had a window air conditioner or something. But do you mind if we all sleep down the basement? So we're in the basement at Park Street, and we got the window opens, right? And we waited for, they were asleep at 10:30, 11 o'clock. Waited till about 1 a.m. We're listening to the tunes and stuff. I had a little record player and stuff. And we'd open up the door, and there's nobody around. Dundas basically rolled up the sidewalks and went to bed back then. I think there was maybe 4 or 5 police officers back then, and they had 2 cruisers. It was like Andy at Maybury. So he opened up the window, and we'd start digging. And we had another door where we lifted the boards up, and we started digging out that whole thing. Because the car was in there. He'd park his car in the garage. So we dug it out at night, and we filled those baskets up. And back when I was a kid, the Cub Scouts and stuff, we had an apple day, and you go collecting baskets, and you get, I don't know, 2 cents or a nickel a basket or something crazy. And so we had all these baskets, and we'd take all the dirt and we'd put it in all the gardens around the neighborhood. You can't make this up. And I got witnesses. So the mothers would get up in the morning, and I remember my mom saying that Louise was talking about her garden being nice and fresh, and this sort of dark dirt and stuff. And Where did that come from? I don't know, what are you asking me for? I'm not a gardener. So that's how we got rid of the dirt. So the place ended up being about 4 feet or so deep, and it was a 10 by 6 or so. We dug all that dirt out, and then they had a tunnel into the middle of the garage. So everything was great. We had our stuff down there, and I took notes on how they built it, and we took these 2x10s and we put them up on top, over top of some bricks. And that was how we held the whole thing up, and I put these oak beams across it, because you get all this stuff from, which was now, it ended up being Rona, but it was Cashway Lumber, and before that it was Schnetzinger's, and it was right up where Shoppers Drug Market up the street. And there was a big bin there. So all the scrap wood, you could just help yourself. And we did. We had all kinds of wood. And of course, Mom and Dad's away during the day, so we're just having a good time. The car's not in there, close the garage door, and we've got the whole place under construction. It was great. And of course, we knew what time they were coming home, so we put everything back. It was all neatly put back where it was supposed to be. And it was just like the movie, right? And at the end of it, I got this shelf, and we had it so that you could move it over, because it was a small door, and we're all, I don't know, there wasn't a fat one amongst us. We were all 85, 100 pounds, maybe not even that. And so we could crawl out of this little door we made at the end, because it was an escape hatch, because once the car moved over. So then I'm trying to figure out, can't be any more than, I don't know, 13, 14 years old. Whenever, I think the movie came out in 65. So is it gonna completely disintegrate when the car drives over? We don't know. So I wasn't great at math, but I think Andy Harvey came up with this. He said, well, it's only the weight of the front wheel going over, because the back wheel was here and the front wheel's going over, and that's it. So it's momentary. And I said, oh, we got to get something stronger than the wood we've got. He said, why don't we go up on the tracks and look for something? So we did. And we found a piece of train rail. And back then they would, now it's a continuous thing, and they weld it. Back then they didn't. They put it all together and bolted it and stuff. And there was a gap in it for expansion. So we found a piece about, I don't know, this big, and it was weighed a ton. So here we are with our homemade skateboards. So a skateboard back then was, you could get 2 skateboards out of a pair of skates. And you bought them at Jippy Jack's, that was a Jack Pinder's variety. And you screwed them down on the bottom of a 2x4, and then you put a piece of wood on top. And there were steel wheels, and they made a hell of a noise, but that we got 2 skateboards, and we put it on there. So you can imagine these 5 kids coming down Sydenham over here with a piece of rail, train rail, heavy as hell. And we're trying to get it down the whole place. Hot as hell in the summer too. So we managed to get it into place. That was the beam, right? That was the beam. So everything's great. We had our old sailor wine down there, just garbage, whatever we could get our hands on. So this reminds you of American Graffiti. Whatever you could get your hands on, we did. And most of the time we weren't going to the liquor store, because we're not getting in there anytime soon. We got, we just took it from our parents and stuff, right? And so if it was whiskey and stuff, you'd undo the bottle, you'd fill it up, and then put water in the rest of it. And whether they got it or not, I don't know, but nothing ever happened. So we had that, and a couple of the guys had some weed and stuff, and we had all the posters, like Led Zeppelin and stuff like that on the whatever we were doing. And carpeted and all decked out. And the garage had hydro. And I was always a gadget guy, like from day one. And had my room all wired up. I had a control panel, switch the lights on and off. So I wired up, crazy, 110, could have killed myself. Wired up a switch so that when it lifted up the door, the light came on in there, because I got this switch out of I think Radio Shack at the time, bought it. Now you got to remember, I was really independent, because my dad says, you can have a bit of an allowance, but I don't have much, so go out and get your work. So my first job was at the golf course, caddying. So I'm 11, 12 years old, caddying the entire afternoon for $2.50. I was crazy enough to do it again. So like 36 holes in one twice. Anyway, I had that, and I had my own business called Keith Green's Maintenance. So I got those printed up, and I had 21 lawns to cut, a bunch of snow to do, and odd jobs, whatever came my way. I also worked at the Bantam store, which is now where the Max Milk store is, where Tim Hortons is on York and King. There was a Bantam store there, and for a whole 85 cents an hour. I went down there after school in the summers, but then I got a job at Steinberg's, which is now Metro, up at the plaza, and worked there. And from 1970 to 74, I was working at Steinberg's, and it was $5.65 an hour. So that was good money, because they gave us, it was crazy, I was in the union, kid, part-time, but they put you in the union. And we ended up, I think it was $3 for lunch, and back then a drink was 75 cents and a hot dog was $1 or something. So you're pocketing it. It was crazy, just crazy, right? You got your birthday off. What do I need your birthday off for? My kid. So back to the tunnel. But yeah, I was able to buy stuff, had money, and it was my own money too. It wasn't what my parents were giving me. So, you know, you go out and own your own. I was saving money, but I was also spending it and having a good time. So we're playing in the neighborhood one day, and we're having a good time. And all of a sudden, my dad yells out my name, and he was a part-time opera singer. And he had a huge tenor voice. You could hear it all over the neighborhood, right? So whenever you wanted to corral the kids, he'd just yell their names, and everybody would hear them, and they'd come running, right? So he yells out my name, and I said to David and Bill, I said, you don't suppose he's found our tunnel, just like the Great Escape? And he did. He was in the garage, he was sweeping it out, and he pulled the mat up, and there's a friggin' door. Pulls the door up, and the light comes on. And, what the hell is this? And we all come running over. Oh, it's our fort. You're what? I will go down and take a look at it, and he leaned in, and he's, where does this go? And of course, it looked like a long tunnel, and it stopped, and then it turned into the room, right? It was like an L shape. And he gets down there, and he's on his hands and knees, and we're just standing up there shaking, like, and because back then, it wasn't like it was now. You got to whip it. And he comes up and he goes, and he called Bill Lawson over. Bill was a painter and decorator next door, and Dave and I were best friends. And he goes, look what these kids have done. And Bill goes, that's pretty cool. That's just like the Great Escape. And we're all sitting there going, mm-hmm. So, and there was no recording back then. You only saw the Great Escape once. There's no way of recording it, right? It came on, but there was like maybe 12 stations or 5 stations. I don't remember. All I know is that you had to go like this when you wanted to change a station. There's no remotes, right? You had to get up and adjust the volume and turn the thing. So, yeah, we didn't have to fill it in. It was okay. And he got an engineer down from Dominion Glass, a structural engineer and a mechanical engineer. Yeah, Norm. Can't remember his last name now. And he said, Norm said there, he came down and he says, he says, you got to see this. He said, what is it? And he told us. He told Norm. Norm came down and he goes, wow, this is phenomenal. Where the hell did you learn how to do this? And he said, well, just watch the movie. Wrote a bunch of stuff down. And so everything was safe, everything was good, and he just left it there because we couldn't fill it in. All the dirt's all around the neighborhood, and we told him what we did, and that all came out, and we were fine. But that was part of it, you know, doing it. And then we started making forts down where the soil was better. The soil down here is pretty much rock and dirt. But down by Olympic Arena, which was the old dump, if you can believe it, we were down there, it's clay. So you could make some phenomenal tunnels and forts down there. And we were in that. And we're picking out garbage and everything. I mean, it was pretty ruthless stuff. They were, landfill just compacts, right? I can't believe we're still alive after doing all that. But so I don't know if you want to change the subject or not. But
well, you covered a lot of it too.
pretty crazy stuff.
So you said your first job was at the golf course?
Yeah, caddying.
How did you get that?
I just went up there and said, I don't know anything about golf. I want a caddy. So the guy says, okay, you go over to that. See the hill down there? It's still there, where they've put all the golf carts and stuff, right? And that was I think it was the pro shop. No, it wasn't the pro shop back then. It was where they just stored their stuff. You sit on the hill. Now, if you just started, you sit over there to the left, and the experienced guys sit over there, and there's a pecking order. So you just sat there until somebody wanted a caddy. And I was fortunate enough to get a couple of guys that knew how to golf, and they weren't expecting anybody with any experience. You just had to carry the clubs, and I did. And I remember my first golf game. I got to the third green, and I was on the green, standing there, and I went, look at that, there's a nickel, and I walked over and picked it up. That didn't go off well. That's a marker for the guy's ball. So that didn't work very well at all. That was, where the hell did you get this kid from? Because he had to go out with an experienced caddy, and he actually didn't tell me that that's what they do. So from then on in, I got a really, really good lesson on how the whole game works and what clubs to give and things like that, because I didn't know. And then you became kind of a private caddy where there was people who liked you, and they paid you extra. So you ended up getting probably $4 a game, and you would have a schedule. So I usually would go up there on a Saturday and Sunday, and it would be most of the day. And you would do, I remember one fellow was Mr. Johnson. You didn't call anybody by their first name back then. Which is the way they should be now, but not necessarily. And his name was Mr. Johnson. And I remember golfing or caddying for Charles Jarabinski once. And Charles had to have the biggest bag with the most clubs. I had no idea if he was any good or not because I don't remember. But I do know that he came back in one day and he went to Stan Carmen, who was the pro. And Stan was your typical he was your typical sort of 60s golf pro with the shirt on and the pleated pants and stuff like that, with a stogie in his mouth, and he was just a typical guy. And Charles came in and said, "I'm not paying this kid. He didn't improve my game." And Stan turned around and said, "He's 12. He doesn't know anything. Pay him. In fact, give him a tip." And he was really upset at giving me like $3. Charles Jarabinski, the owner of Flamborough Downs and Wiltshire Construction, and the guy who built the Governor's Estates apartments. I mean, you got to be kidding me. $3? Anyway, that was my Charles Jarabinski story. Yeah, so I just became a private caddy, but then I got a little bit too busy with my business, so I quit, stopped going up there, and was earning quite a bit of money. So when I hit high school, I had 2 cars, and one was a summer car I really loved. It was a Morris Oxford 1965. Bought it for $300. Beautiful machine, really, really nice machine. And then I had an old Valiant, 67 Valiant for the winter. Bought it off my aunt. Slant 6 engine. You couldn't kill it. You could do anything you wanted with that thing. It would not die. They were amazing machines back then. And it was a Chrysler product. Go figure. So had had lots of dough, but I grew up in the drug culture, and you either got into that and got all messed up, and when it came in, remember, everything changed in '69, and that was Woodstock. So I'm just going into high school at Dundas District and didn't do very well because I wasn't academic. My mind was entrepreneurial, and I was an inventor. Just gotta have some water here for a second. Is that all right?
That's good, great.
You slice that out, don't you?
I can slice, yeah.
Slice and dice. So, yeah, where was I? Oh yeah, the drugs. So Mom and Dad did a very good job of, and I'm not too sure when this happens because I don't have any children. We decided not to. And I didn't necessarily want any. I don't know why. But, and you not being a psychologist or psychiatrist, I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm only kidding. So, what happened was, I ended up, our friends were intrigued about that. Why aren't we smoking dope and stuff? And a lot of the guys went off down that road. And there's a couple of fellas in town, Dave Middleton and Joe Music, and Joe, I think, overdosed. His dad was a counselor. And he was always on the fringe of stuff. And they were into LSD and speed and everything. I remember the guys shooting up speed when we were up at the grocery store, right? It was crazy stuff. And they'd go out and try and get the right order for the cars, right? And back then, which EMP still does down here, I think it's Metro now, you can go get your car, and they put your groceries on a little box, and they go out and you pull up to the trunk and put your stuff in. And I was on card order a lot, and I remember the guys getting the numbers wrong because they couldn't read them. So you take your number with you, which could be 61, for the sake of a number, and you got to match it up with the groceries, right? And he wasn't matching it up, so you would get somebody else's groceries, and you wouldn't find out till you got home. So that was expensive because they had to send a taxi to go pick up those groceries on both houses, right, and come back and flip it around. So the manager got quite upset at that stuff. And so he should, because groceries don't have a high margin. But we had some good times with that. And I remember one night at Steinberg's, I got on night crew. So night crew were the guys who stocked the shelves. So the absolute chaotic shambles that the grocery store is in when it closes turns into this beautiful, nice and neat. All the tins are turned English side out, and the crazy stuff was the salmon and tuna and the baby food, which salmon and tuna, for the most part, I think are in baskets and stuff now, but they're differently stacked. Back then we stacked them all up, and we went through these price wars where we were going up and down a couple of pennies, right? And so you had to take them all off, reprice them, put them all back. So crazy stuff. I hated it. It was good money though, and it was at like I said, it was at night. Started off at $2, and remember, I'm getting 85 cents at the Bantam store. They started me at $2.62, and in 4 years I was up to $5.65. And they wanted to put me in the management program, but I didn't want anything to do with it because I just hated it. There was no intelligence to it. There was nothing. I was always entrepreneurial. I wanted to, and I had my own business on the side. So, we're up there one night. We're doing the filling the stuff with groceries, and you ended up with getting 2 or 3 skids. So I did the pop aisle and frozen foods. So you'd have a break, and there was guys up there that were full time. And they were up there probably every night or every other night or something like that, but they were full time. And they were in charge of everything. So what would happen is you'd have your breaks and stuff, right? And they take the microphone at night and they put an elastic band around it and put a radio to it. So you had music through the whole store, loud as hell. And we're doing our thing. And I learned very quickly that if you cleaned off your skid fast, guess what they gave you the next night? Another skid. So you can only do so many. Then if you can't get it done, then you get shit. So I figured out this is how many I can do. I'm just doing 2 or whatever it was. Because you couldn't do 3 or 4. You just physically couldn't do it as fast as you could. And you start making mistakes and you mess things up. So one night, his name was Asbestos. He came in. He had a 650 BSA. It's a motorcycle. And he brought it in. And back then, they were crappy bikes, and it was raining out that night. And he brought it in between the 2 doors. You know how they have the outside door and the inside door, right? for the winter in the air. So he parked it. One of the guys bet him $20 he wouldn't drive it around the store. Wait a minute, you're going to drive a motorcycle around the grocery store? Yeah. And he did. So we got a problem here. He gets on the bike, starts it up, and it's kind of puffing blue smoke. It's crappy. So he goes down the front aisle, which was the meat aisle, to the deli, and as he's turning, he slides because the deli's floor hasn't been cleaned yet, and it's kind of greasy. That's what delis, people drop shit, right? So he leaves a skid mark on the floor. Do you think we can get the skid mark off? Not a chance. Goes up and down the aisles. We were having a ball. This is a motorcycle in the store. So we're sitting there. What the hell is that? We look up and there's this blue haze on the air conditioning system up on top, right? It's about 4 feet from the ceiling. And it's just, oh, that'll go. We're going anytime soon. All right, and we're it's like 3 or 4 in the morning. That haze hasn't gone anywhere, and we've got the air conditioning system pumping. So to cover up the skid mark, when the floor cleaner came in and he couldn't get it up, we took the bread counter and we moved it down to where the skid mark was. So we covered up the skid mark. That's the kind of stuff that we did. Crazy stuff. And of course, back then the loaves of bread. I think they're still twisted, right? Wait. Just this is stuff we did. Opened up the bread, took a slice, go to the deli counter, all the meat's there, a couple of slices, Had our own stash of margarine someplace. Made up your sandwiches at night. Here was the tricky part though, and these guys got caught and they got fired. When they started grocery shopping for themselves. And they would leave the groceries out the back dock, and the wives would pull up at 3 in the morning and pick up their groceries. And one night they did a sting, and they caught them. So I don't know how often they did it, and in fact I didn't really even know. I found out afterwards because I'm in my aisle doing my thing. But there's a couple of them had that gig going, so that was not good. That was not good. So, but it was an interesting life. Anyway, back to the drug thing. So. I decided with Dave Lawson one day, we didn't want to get into the drugs. I don't know why, just didn't. I never smoked because my dad didn't do very well with his smoking. He smoked for 40 years. Ended up with angina and heart disease, and it was bad. So maybe I took a lesson from that. I don't know. So we're about, I was 15, and I answered an ad in the paper. Now at the time, the Beatles were very popular. And all teenagers go towards an icon, an idol, a trend or something. And the Beatles decided to expand, which they were doing with their drugs, and their music changed. And then they kind of got into the religious side of it, or the spiritual side of it, so they ended up with going to Maharishi Yogi in India. So there was a society called Anandamaga, and they were from India, and they were making roots into Canada. It was Hindu. It was Bhakti Yoga. We answered an ad in the paper. Went down to St. James Cathedral down on James Street North, and Oscar and I went down there, and here's this real thing, 4 foot nothing, all robed, beard, yogi, Sri Anandamaji, and this other fellow who decided to become a hippie. His name was Bill Ralph, and they've all got their Sanskrit names, their Hindu names. And we went down there, thought it was really cool, and we tried it for a while, and didn't cost anything, and it wasn't a cult. It was actually Bhakti Yoga, so it was a philosophical way of life. And it was instead of the drugs, which we found interesting as we did our meditation, we were getting sort of the same kind of high off of it. It was very interesting because I was describing what I was going through and getting down to those different levels in the brain and what your thoughts were. And of course, every other weekend or sometimes twice a month, we'd go off to retreats, and there was a fellow owned quite a few acres. I don't remember how many, probably 50 or something in Kitchener. And we ended up being a bunch of hippies in sort of a commune. And I'm still going to school, so I didn't take off and do that, but I trained with this yogi for 6 years. And we were, it was very interesting. It was a philosophical way of life and pretty heavy reading and everything else, right? And it was based on the Hindu religion. So I lost my ability to believe in a supreme being through that, but gained an enormous amount of valuable information and a different way of life on how to treat your fellow man and how the universe works and how we are all connected through nature and energy and everything else. So I'm not necessarily an atheist, but I don't have a belief in a particular set of rules. But the rules that I do have are to go through life paying it forward and being as kind and gentle as you can to people. And I still do my yoga and meditation, and it's very interesting stuff. So yeah, we had a good time. And of course, when we went there, we learned macrobiotic eating and all of that stuff. So maybe we should talk a little bit about Dundas. It was a very, very interesting place other than the childhood stuff, but Dundas used to have a band called the Patriots. And I was in that, playing a tenor drum, and we had all the parades. So 1967 was a great year for parades. That was centennial, Canada's centennial year. And we went everywhere. We got on a bus, and I don't know where the hell we ended up. We were all over Stratford, Kitchener, all of those places where they had parades and stuff. Dundas, like I said, was a very, very quiet town. When I first moved here, Park Street, the house was kitty corner to Sydenham, and kitty corner to the backyard is where the Hills lived. And Harry Hill was a firefighter at the time. And his brother, Bruce, I believe was a captain or a lieutenant, but became deputy chief, and Harry became a lieutenant. And I used to go up on Saturday mornings, sometimes during the week, and polish the truck and sit on the one that we now have as the Rotary Club. So the 1961, from what I remember, and the other trucks, I used to go up there quite a bit. I've known that all my life, pretty much, and now I'm trying to save the 5 trucks. So there's a group of us that have got together. We're starting a not-for-profit corporation, and it's a trust to have the 1929, the 1937, the 47, the 56, and the 61. So the research that I've done, we're the only city in North America with all 5 of the original trucks. A lot of towns have 1 or 2. We're the only one with all 5. So it's quite a daunting project. I've been at it for since 1999 when the Rotary Club needed something for the kids and to be more viable in the community and a sustainable project. So we acquired the 1961 off of Jim Campbell, who buys and sells fire trucks as a hobby. But I never thought that I'd be part ownership of those trucks when I was a kid. So it's interesting what goes around in the town. And one thing I've learned to be very, very careful of, and that is never burn your bridges. Be very, very careful who you get mad at and how you react to certain people, because if you're going to stay in your town, you'd be surprised how small it becomes when you get older. The town gets really, really small because everybody knows you. And back in 1967, my dad started Dundas Lock and Key. So I was in high school. I wanted to be a graphic and fashion designer. I didn't have the marks to go to Sheridan. I did afterwards, but I didn't at the time. So I went straight into Dad's business. Out of high school, I went to Highland. And Highland at the time was a technical school. So your first year, you went into mechanical drafting and machine shop and sheet metal and welding and framework, electrical, electronics, and architectural design. And then the second year, third and fourth year, you picked 2 of those, or 3 of them, and plus your math and science and English and everything. And you basically spent the 4 years, remaining 4 years, somewhere in that discipline. So I picked electrical and electronics and architectural design. Okay, just felt like doing it. I didn't want to be a welder, I didn't want to be a house framer, I didn't want to be an auto mechanic, so I took 1 year of auto mechanics, but decided not to do that, wanted to go this route. So I did. And in 1974, all the boys were corralled into the gym. Probably 150 of us or something. I don't know, it was a baby boomer, so I don't know, it was a lot of kids. The girls had another session because they were going to be homemakers, secretaries, typists, whatever. You got to remember when this was, 1974 or 1973, yeah, 74, somewhere in there. Yeah, and the recruiters came in from Hamilton for the guys. So there was Westinghouse, Procter & Gamble, Stelco, DeFasco, International Harvester, all those guys, right? And they came in, and I think, if I recall, there was half a dozen of them, offered each boy in that gym 2 jobs. So I had 12 jobs automatically. Just go on down, we'll train you, we don't care. Go to the discipline that you've done for the 4 years. So I would go into electrical. The guys that were doing sheet metal, whatever, right? They would go into that discipline. And guaranteed, don't even have to do summer holidays. Just the minute you get out of here, come on down, we'll sign you up. That's how many jobs there were back then. Now, that was all the area high schools too. All the technical schools in town, right? I don't know how many technical high schools there were from Stony Creek to Hamilton, Dundas, but there was quite a few. That's how many people they wanted. That's what was going on. That's what the economy was like. It was booming. Okay, that was the 60s and 70s. So from like, well, obviously since the war with the boomers, but it was crazy. It was insane, right? Until the first recession hit back in 81. Okay, so that's what it was like. I had been, since grade 8, training to be a locksmith with my dad. I would go out with him and stuff, and he taught me how to pick locks and everything. So in 1974, I started in the business. The business was in the house, in the basement. He wanted it for retirement. So he started in 67. And he had it going now for about 8 years. And he was getting well known. He took his correspondence courses and everything and became a locksmith. There was no actual police checks or anything for locksmithing. So anybody that got out of Kingston Penitentiary could be a locksmith. It was crazy. But if you did have a criminal record, you couldn't get bonded. And you needed to be bonded for this stuff because you were doing security for people. So I spent the first summer fixing up the porch and the shop downstairs and everything. And we grossed $8,000 that year, which was ridiculous. That wasn't a lot of money at all. And I couldn't make a living at it. So we got to do something different. And Dad was absolutely terrified of making it full-time because that wasn't his gig. And he was still working at Dominion Glass. So my mom actually went around and rented a store where Don Robertson has his ComFree or something, Realty right now. So at the time there was Botchler optometrists on the corner of Church and King. Key shop was in the middle, and then there was Dundas Office Supply. So Arlene Vanderbeek now owns that building, but she ended up inheriting it off her mom because her mom bought it. So that's where the store started. So 1974, we grossed that. And then the next year, 1975, it tripled. It went to 24,000. Yeah. Because we were on King Street. And I got a big sign out there and everything. And there was no locksmith in town. And it grew exponentially. It just went crazy. So in 86, when I sold the business to Richard Dix, it was doing $500,000 a year with 14 employees and 15 grand a month coming in. Not just locks and keys though, we had a really, really great alarm business. So I built it up. And that's where my knowledge of electronics came in. So it all kind of started to tie in, right? Yeah, that worked out really well. Now Dundas Lock and Key, in order to make money in this town, and it's changed, but there was a huge vacuum between Sydenham and basically Albert Street and Church. The reason for that was because there was a Central Hotel and there was a Melbourne Hotel, both of which had a pretty horrible sort of reputation for getting drunk all the time and having fights go out on the street and everything. And again, this was the 60s, and so it was a changing world. So before people started smoking dope and getting stoned, they were getting ripped all the time and getting drunk, so there was fights going on and everything. So it's pretty crazy down that end of town. Now both those places have gone and they've been repurposed as businesses. The only one left was the Collins. So, and in high school, we used to go down to the Collins for lunch, and I remember you could fill, I think draft beer was, if I recall back then, was probably 20 cents a glass or something. So we'd fill the round table, drink that, and drive back to school. There was nothing for us to have a case of beer in the back of the car and be drinking it while you were driving around. It was crazy. Never got into any problems with it. I mean, we never got to the point. I don't think there's any alcohol shouldn't be mixed with this at all. But we never got so blitzed that we actually. And back then, there wasn't the cars there was on the road now. You never went anywhere near the highways. You're out in the country. There's no cars. There was nothing. So if you ran into a tree, you ran into a tree. But none of my friends did. And we never got that blitzed that we couldn't get it because we really, really cherished our cars. I mean, we spent a lot of money and a lot of time on those babies, and the last thing we wanted to do was ditch it. So, Anyway, it was pretty weak too, that draft, I think. So that's what the town was like, and in order to make money, you had to set up a shop between Sydenham and Cross. And that's where we made the most money with Dundas Lock and Key. So that's right across from the insurance place. That's where it is now. It's a clothing store right now, right beside Dolce Camera. That's where it was. And then when Richard bought it, he had it for quite a while. And then he bought the house up here on right on Church and King. So it ended up back where it started, in the Kid Corner, right beside Martin's Jewelers. And still going, and good for him. He's had it since 86, so. Got it for a song, because I got into a partnership problem. I had ended up patenting a thermostatic control system for large factories, very, very large buildings, 100,000 square foot and up. It would have taken care of the heating issues with Bertram's. It was that kind of technology. And my partner wanted it, and we had a falling out, so I basically started all over again with a company called Temtronic Designs from 86 till 92, and then when that recession hit, that big one. So when I started Dundas Lock and Key in 74, or didn't start it, but got in with Dad, when we started to expand, the recession hit and the interest rates went to 21%. Inflation, I don't know, I sometimes get this backwards. So I don't know whether inflation was 12 or unemployment was 12, or the other way around. But one was 12, the other one was 8%. So either unemployment was 8% and inflation was 12%. It was crazy. So I went to the bank to borrow $80,000 at 21%, and they lent it to me. Because back then, there was bank managers that managed the bank and the money in it. And they looked at your business, they looked at your inventory, they looked at your books, they looked at how you were doing, and they decided what they were going to do. Not some head office done by the numbers with your personal credit. We didn't have to sign for anything. It was the business that held it. Those were the good old days, right? And it was great. And so I got my $80,000, I built a central station, hired the people, and it just went through the roof from there. It was crazy. Now, I thought that we were incredible at what we did. Locksmithing and everything, build that business up to where it was. We were very good, but what drove it was the baby boomers, kids. They were breaking in, and everybody got paranoid. So we've got this massive cohort of teenagers that drove the business up because everybody wanted better locks. Because when I moved here, you didn't lock your door, you just walked out. So that's why the business went nuts. If you look at the demographics and how it worked and everything else. I didn't know that at the time. The hell do I know? 30 or 20 something, right? So, and my dad didn't either. He just thought that would be a great business, and he was good with his hands, and he took the lessons. So in 1974, when I got out of school, I decided to become a safe cracker. There's only one place in North America at the time, actually the world, that you could learn how to crack safes that I was aware of, down in Florida. And the school was sponsored by Sergeant Greenleaf, and those were the people who made the safe locks, 3-wheeled combination locks. And the founder, Harry Miller, invented the 3-wheel lock and invented manipulation. And I was trained to find the numbers just by simply spinning the dial. Now, at my absolute peak, it would take about between 12 and 18 minutes to open a safe. Okay? Not like TV, not just, it's open. James Bond shit. That didn't exist. Fascinating stuff. Was checked out. I had to get myself fingerprinted with Hamilton Regional Police. So 6 months, it was a 6-month waiting thing. The reason for that was they had to check out your entire record. So if I had have been in trouble with the law previous to that, they weren't going to teach me how to do that. So if you had a criminal record, you're not getting in that school anytime soon. So the two of us got into 1972 Chevy Malibu. Ron, can't remember his last name now, damn. His dad owned Ottawa Key Shop, ended up buying it from him, and he's still there, still locksmith. Two of us went down to learn safe cracking. Because there was only one other guy in town, Albeck, who knew how to crack a safe, and he didn't do it the way we did, he drilled it. And drilling gets messy, because once you've drilled the safe now, it's vulnerable to heat and everything else. You gotta put asbestos in it back then, and weld it back up, and it was messy. So getting into it the way we did was good. What was interesting was that Albeck ended up having a heart attack, and I had, because he was a pretty old guy, and I ended up getting a lot of the banks downtown in Hamilton from that. So, and boy, the stuff that was in those safety deposit boxes when we went in, because I was servicing the bank vaults. And a bank vault is very, very intimidating, but actually it comes down to the same lock on a bank vault in that little area is the same lock in the safe you buy for your office. Same lock. Just the door is heavier, thicker, and it's got stuff in it that if you start drilling it, it locks up. Okay, I don't want to get into the technical side of that. So, yeah, so the Canada Trust I'm in now, I was servicing the locks, and the Bank of Montreal, Royal Bank, and CIBC, did them all. So it was an interesting career. I did, however, get pretty bored with it because there's only 8 lock manufacturers. So once you've learnt them, Dad and I had the opportunity to rebuild all the locks in Dundurn Castle. We just put in a bid for it, and we got the job. And back when Dundurn Castle was an absolute mess, they just left it. It deteriorated. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on it in the 70s and 80s, I think, to get it back as a tourist attraction. And part of that was rebuilding all the locks, and they were a mess too. They were just horrible inside, and we had to, make a lot of the parts from by hand from metal and stuff, because they were all cast inside, because they had the old skeleton keys. So that was one of our sort of claims to fame, I guess. Yeah.